When Half-Life 2 arrived, many people thought it was just another shooter with nice graphics and an intriguing story. But the truth is that Valve was playing at being from the future, while the rest of the industry was still crawling. Realistic physics, narrative integrated into the gameplay, characters who seemed alive. All of it was there, years before it became the standard. And the most curious thing? Many of us didn't even realize how revolutionary that game truly was. When Half-Life 2 arrived in 2004, it felt like we were witnessing the future of gaming. The narrative was delivered in such a natural way that we almost forgot we were playing. There were none of those cutscenes that take you out of the immersion. Everything happened before your eyes, with real characters reacting to the world, with looks, gestures, and speech that seemed to come from someone truly alive. It was the kind of narrative that didn't just tell you the story. It made you live the story through the silent gaze of Gordon Freeman. Another gigantic leap was the game's physics. The Source engine transformed the concept of interaction with the environment. Throwing objects, pushing boxes, using the gravity gun to manipulate the surroundings, all of it felt magical. It was the first time many players felt the environment was truly palpable. It was physics with a purpose, existing not just to dazzle, but to become part of the gameplay and the solutions to puzzles. This gave the game an extra layer of realism and creativity that few productions have managed to repeat. The artificial intelligence also deserved applause. Enemies didn't just stand there waiting to be shot. They took cover, flanked, and used the terrain to their advantage. Every combat with Combine soldiers felt like a tense, unpredictable game of chess. The same was true for allies. Characters like Alex seemed to truly understand their surroundings, reacting with empathy and emotion. At that time, seeing an alive AI like that was almost unbelievable. Behind all this genius, the development was a roller coaster. Valve faced a source code leak months before the launch, which almost ruined the project. Furthermore, the transition to the Source engine required rethinking the game from scratch in several aspects. Even so, the studio kept its cool and delivered an incredibly polished product by 2004 standards. It was proof that ambition and patience, when combined, can yield something timeless. The legacy of Half-Life 2 is a phenomenon that transcends the game itself. It inspired how modern FPS games tell their stories, how they value physics and environment, and even how they build their universes with layers of mystery. Games like BioShock, Portal, and Metro drank directly from this source. Even decades later, its design is still cited as an example of the balance between action, narrative, and technology. And of course, culturally, Half-Life 2 left a profound mark. It became a symbol of an era when games began to be taken seriously as art. Every player from that time remembers the first time they picked up the gravity gun, or heard the metallic sound of the Striders approaching. It was more than a technical milestone. It was an emotional watershed. A reminder of how genuine immersion doesn't depend on ultra-realistic graphics, but on a world that seems to breathe along with you. Talking about the context of Half-Life 2 is diving into a moment of transition in the games industry. The first Half-Life had already shown that shooters could tell cinematic stories, but Valve wanted to go further. In the late 90s and early 2000s, computers were making immense technological leaps, and the studio saw an opportunity to redefine the genre there. It wasn't just about creating a new FPS. It was about creating a new way to live a digital world. And Gordon Freeman would, once again, be our guide in that leap. During development, which began around 1999, Valve remained almost completely silent. It was too ambitious a project to be shown prematurely. And the reason was simple: the Source engine. While the world was still using the Quake engine and its derivatives, Valve was building an entirely new engine, capable of rendering faces with realistic human expressions, complex physics, and detailed environments. It was this technology that would make Half-Life 2 visually stunning, and, for many, ahead of its time. But there wasn't just brilliance on this path. One of the biggest dramas in the history of game development happened here. The source code leak in 2003. A hacker broke into Valve's systems and released the game's content onto the internet, months before launch. For many studios, this would have been the end. But Valve reacted calmly and intelligently. They reinforced their security, reevaluated part of the development, and with incredible discipline, managed to fix everything and release the game the following year. It's a story of resilience that has become a legend. Another curiosity is how Valve's philosophy influenced the creative process. There were no rigid hierarchies or isolated departments. Any developer could comment on any part of the project. This open style meant that Half-Life 2 was shaped organically, with ideas born collectively, from weapon design to chapter structure. It was a creative chaos, but guided by a unified vision, that of total immersion. This period also marked a new chapter for digital distribution. It was with Half-Life 2 that Steam was born, the platform that would forever change the way games are bought and updated. Many players complained at first, finding it strange to have to be online to activate the game, but unaware that they were witnessing the beginning of a revolution in the market. Steam's success was Valve's first big step toward the empire. It would build in the following years. The context of Half-Life 2 goes far beyond the game itself. It's the story of a daring studio, a period of technological transition, and a mentality that bet on the future before it existed. Every line of code and every texture carries that feeling of a new world, of discovery, of something that could only have been born at that moment, when imagination and technology finally met perfectly. One of the things that always struck me about Half-Life 2 was the strength of its characters. Even with Gordon Freeman being a silent protagonist, the game creates very strong emotional connections. Alex Vance, for example, is a landmark in the representation of female characters in games. Charismatic, intelligent, and incredibly human. She is not a simple mission companion. She lives the world around her, reacts with empathy, humor, and even fear. Her eyes said much more than 1,000 lines of dialogue, and this made Freeman's journey feel truly shared. The other characters also have a powerful presence. Dr. Kleiner, with his somewhat distracted manner of a genius scientist, and the enigmatic G-Man, who seems to manipulate everything in the shadows, create a perfect contrast between the human and the mysterious. Every figure in Half-Life 2 is built with purpose, with facial expressions that, for 2004, were simply unbelievable. Seeing an NPC's face speak for the first time without looking like a static mask was a technological and narrative leap that helped the player believe in that reality. The setting, in turn, is the beating heart of the experience. City 17 is a lesson in design. The decadent Soviet city, controlled by the oppressive Combine, brings an atmosphere of cold, almost suffocating dystopia. Every street, every abandoned building, and every propaganda poster on the walls tells a story of fear and control. It's fascinating how the game never explains everything, but you feel the weight of alien domination in every detail. This world is not just a backdrop, it's a character in itself. And understanding this is what makes Half-Life 2 so unique. Valve managed to balance the industrial and the natural visual styles magnificently. One moment you are fleeing in claustrophobic corridors, and the next, traversing open and melancholic landscapes. This constant alternation between urban spaces and rural areas creates a sense of journey, of continuous escape. It's almost as if the game breathes along with you. And precisely because of this, each environment carries its own identity. Ravenholm, for example, is pure tension and horror, a tonal shift that still gives any player the chills today. From an aesthetic point of view, Half-Life 2 was a divider. The realistic but not exaggerated visual style managed to age surprisingly well. The cold color palette, the gray tones, and the atmospheric filters gave it an almost cinematic touch. It was the first time an FPS felt like an interactive movie without having to abandon gameplay. Its beauty didn't come from explosions or colorful scenery, but from silence and decay. From a destroyed world that seemed to beg to be freed. The combination of characters, setting, and aesthetics transformed Half-Life 2 into more than a game. It was an existential experience. Every look, every distant sound, and every piece of that scenery said something about resistance and survival. It was a world that hurt, but held you precisely because of that. And perhaps that is the magic of Valve, building a universe that not only impresses graphically, but also touches you in a way that few games can, even today. The atmosphere of Half-Life 2 is one of its greatest triumphs. From the very first moment the train arrives in City 17, there's a strange sensation. That kind of discomfort that makes you believe something terrible has happened, even before seeing any enemies. It's a silent, cold world, full of suspicious glances and masked guards. Valve achieves something rare, making the player feel the weight of oppression without needing to say a word. Every deserted street, every distant siren, and every billboard with Dr. Breen's voice reminded the player that freedom was just a memory. The sound, in turn, is the heart of this immersion. There is no constant soundtrack. Instead, there is the sound of life, or the lack thereof. The echo of footsteps in a wet tunnel, the mechanical hum of a Combine scanner, the distant whisper of the wind between destroyed buildings. When the score enters, it doesn't invade, it comments. An electronic touch begins precisely when the action calls for it. raising the tension without stealing the spotlight from the environment. It's a sound design that serves the narrative, not the other way around, and that was one of the innovations that made Half-Life 2 sound different from any other FPS of the time. But perhaps the point that most redefined the game, and much of the industry afterward, was the physics-based gameplay. The gravity gun was not just a weapon. It was a revolution. Suddenly, every object in the scenario became a tool. Boxes, saw blades, barrels, and metal plates turned into allies or enemies depending on your creativity. Solving puzzles, defeating enemies, or even opening paths was no longer a matter of pressing buttons. It became a matter of thinking. Physics became an essential part of the gameplay language, something players felt in their hands. The most impressive thing is how Valve used this physics naturally. Nothing seemed forced. The ideas came organically, integrated into the game's rhythm. When the player needed to realize they could push an object or use something to their advantage, the scenario simply taught it, without tutorials or flashing arrows. It was intelligent design, built on the confidence that the player would learn through exploration. This sense of constant discovery reinforced the feeling of being inside a real and dynamic world. From a technical perspective, the Source engine was revolutionary for making all this possible with impressive fluidity. The way bodies reacted to explosions, how objects rolled naturally, or how water distorted and reflected the environment, created a rare physical immersion for 2004. At a time when many games still had static scenarios, Half-Life 2 stood out for seeming alive, habitable. It was almost a scientific experiment in gameplay. Each room was a small laboratory where the player could play with the laws of physics. The marriage between atmosphere, sound, and physics made Half-Life 2 transcend the label of a simple shooter. It became a complete sensory experience. The tension came as much from the confrontations as from the silence between them. From that moment when you stopped, heard a distant noise and wondered, am I alone? And when you picked up the gravity gun and tested the possibilities, you felt part of the world, not a visitor. This is what makes Half-Life 2 timeless. The way it makes the player not just play, but truly feel science, fear, and freedom mixing in the same instant. The design of Half-Life 2 is one of those cases where everything seems orchestrated with absolute precision. Nothing is there by chance. Every corridor, every enemy, and every pause has a function. The game flows like a continuous line without classic levels or visible loading screens. The player simply lives the journey, from the initial train to the final confrontation, with the world opening up and transforming almost imperceptibly. This fluidity was rare in the 2000s, and it showed a clear philosophy from Valve. Immersion could not be broken for even a second. The gameplay rhythm is another point where Half-Life 2 shines almost surgically. The game alternates intense action and moments of calm in a perfect manner. After a brutal shootout with the Combine, there comes a section of silent exploration or a puzzle that forces you to breathe. And when the piece starts to feel too comfortable, something happens. An ambush, the sound of a helicopter, a sudden attack. It's a game that understands the player's emotional timing and plays with it in the right way, like a good suspense score that knows when to swell and when to fall silent. The level design reinforces all this. Each scenario is built to intuitively guide the player without the need for explicit instructions. The architecture, the lighting, and even the positioning of enemies serve as clues. When there is an alternative path, it almost always rewards you for exploring. When there is danger, the environment speaks before the HUD does. This silent communication between the game and the player is one of Valve's most brilliant signatures, and one of the reasons why Half-Life 2 never feels dated. Another brilliant aspect is how the game constantly changes the type of experience without ceasing to feel cohesive. One moment you are fleeing through the canals, another you are facing horrors in Ravenholm, soon after you take control of vehicles or lead rebels. Each new mechanic is presented organically, without the gameplay feeling broken. This constant variety keeps the player curious and engaged from start to finish, without resorting to exaggeration or unnecessary repetition. It's almost like an interactive symphony, each part with its own rhythm and intensity. The structure also bets on player autonomy. Despite the linear script, Half-Life 2 gives the feeling of freedom because it lets you solve situations your way. The use of physics, limited resources, and the environment creates a natural relationship between strategy and improvisation. You feel like you are making real decisions even if the game leads you to the same destination. It's a very well-constructed illusion of control, and it's part of the magic of its design. The rhythm and design of Half-Life 2 are what make it unforgettable. It doesn't rush. It doesn't try to impress you every second. but it involves you in a constant flow of discovery, danger, and subtlety. Every small victory, every energy recharge, every encounter with new characters has weight, because the game knows exactly when to throw you into chaos and when to let you breathe. It's a balance that few titles have achieved since, and perhaps that is the greatest sign of a true classic. It dictates the rhythm, and you, without realizing it, follow in perfect time. One of the things that always impressed me about Half-Life 2 is the care put into enemy design. They are not just obstacles, they are extensions of the world. Every creature, every soldier, and every machine seems to have its logical function within that universe. The Combine, for example, is not just a military faction. It is a system of total domination, and this is reflected in the appearance of its soldiers, who look more like industrial products than people. The faceless mask, the robotic voice filter, and the standardized uniform reinforce the idea of dehumanization. They are not individuals, but tools of a regime. The mutant enemies, like the headcrabs and zombies, provide the biological counterpoint to this technological oppression. They represent the chaotic and visceral side of the Half-Life 2 world, almost as if nature had been distorted by war and scientific experiments. Facing a zombie with a screaming headcrab on top is an experience that stays in the memory, not only for the terror, but for the way the game makes you feel the weight of degeneration. The classic Ravenholm level is the pinnacle of this. A festival of horror and physics, where fear and creativity coexist in perfect balance. A detail that many forget is the role of physics in how enemies react. Bodies have weight, resistance, impact. Everything responds realistically. This makes battles unique every time. A headcrab can fly away after an accurate shot. An exploded barrel can become an improvised trap, and an enemy shot down in a high place can fall and knock down another. It is the type of interaction that transforms combat into a small spectacle of improvisation. You never feel like you just shot. You feel like you created chaos with elegance. The Combine machines deserve special mention. From the vigilant drones to the striders, there is an almost artistic balance between design and functionality. The sounds they emit, metallic, rhythmic, threatening, are part of the game's psychological terror. The first encounter with a strider is unforgettable. That mechanical insect walk accompanied by the deep sound makes the player understand they are facing something they cannot confront equally. These enemies not only test reflexes, they test nerves. Their design communicates power and fear even before they attack. The weapons of Half-Life 2 are a spectacle in themselves. Valve has always had a keen eye for functional design, and here each weapon has a personality. The Combine rifle has a distinct and elegant sound. The shotgun delivers satisfaction with every shot, and even the most common weapons have a perfect sense of weight and cadence. But the great game changer was the gravity gun. It completely reconfigured the idea of what a weapon could be. It was no longer about eliminating enemies, but about interacting with the world. It was a scientific toy within an action game, and this mixture was revolutionary. Furthermore, the way the game presents these weapons and enemies is brilliant. You don't get everything at once, and this helps the player master each tool at their own pace. Each new enemy arrives at the right time, and each new weapon is an elegant response to these challenges. This smooth, almost imperceptible progression is what keeps the game constantly interesting. There are no forced peaks. There is a natural escalation. It is the kind of design that demonstrates how Half-Life 2 didn't just want to entertain you, but to teach you, test you, and make you feel part of something bigger. A world that reacts, adapts, and challenges you all the time. The launch of Half-Life 2 in November 2004 was not just another event in the industry. It was almost a historical milestone. After years of expectation, delays, and the infamous source code leak, Valve finally delivered something that justified all the waiting. Players accustomed to linear and conventional FPS games were faced with a cinematic, fluid, and absurdly polished game. The impact was immediate. Critics and players called it a masterpiece, and it began to set the standard for quality in first-person narratives. Half-Life 2 didn't just arrive, it redefined what it meant to launch a major game. But its launch also represented the birth of a new era of digital distribution. It was the first major title to require the use of Steam to be played, something that generated controversy at the time, but is now seen as a visionary move. Many didn't know it, but by activating Half-Life 2 online, they were witnessing the beginning of an ecosystem that would forever change the industry's relationship with the public. This courageous step transformed Steam into one of the main gaming platforms on the planet and consolidated Valve as a company that thought decades ahead of the market. The subsequent versions of Half-Life 2 also helped maintain its momentum. The game received re-releases on different platforms, including consoles like Xbox and later the Orange Box in 2007, which brought together Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, Portal, and Team Fortress 2. For many players, this collection was the first contact with the universe of Gordon Freeman and Alex Vance, a package that showed how relevant the game still was years after its original launch. Even in these re-releases, the source engine aged with elegance, preserving the feeling of modernity. Mods also played an essential role in the game's legacy. From the legendary Garry's mod, which became an absurd creation platform where players could manipulate physics and do practically anything, to more serious experiences like Minerva Metastasis, a narrative mod worthy of its own production. It was these community-created projects that kept Half-Life 2 alive for almost 2 decades. It's impressive to think that Valve, by releasing its tools, created one of the most creative ecosystems in the history of video games. And of course, one cannot talk about legacy without mentioning the expansions. Episode 1 and Episode 2 brought a direct continuation of the events, further raising the emotional load and the bond with Alex. The second episode, especially, ended in an impactful way and opened a wound that the community still feels today due to the lack of a closure. Each expansion made it clear that Half-Life 2 was not just a 2004 game, but the beginning of a story that intended to grow along with technology, something that Half-Life Alyx, released in virtual reality years later, would expertly resume. In the end, the legacy of Half-Life 2 was built not only by Valve, but by everyone who played it, modified it, and expanded it. Its launch was the birth of a new distribution model. Its mods transformed it into a laboratory of creativity, and its expansions showed the power of continuous narrative. Even today, it is the kind of game that has not only aged well, it has aged with purpose. Every new version, every mod, and every attempt to recreate its magic reinforces the question that has echoed for decades. Will we ever see Half-Life 3? When we think of Half-Life 2, we are not just remembering an iconic game, we are talking about a complete revolution. In 2004, it not only surprised technically, but redefined what it meant to tell a story within a video game. It was as if Valve had deciphered the formula for total immersion. In every moment, technology, direction, and narrative converged so naturally that it was difficult to distinguish where the script ended and the gameplay began. This total integration between technique and emotion is what made Half-Life 2 a milestone, not only for fans, but for the entire industry. Technically, the game was a pioneer in almost every aspect. The source engine brought physics and facial rendering that seemed like something from another century. When Alex looked at you with genuine expression, that was more than a graphical advance. It was a human advance. The environments had an unprecedented density, full of interactive objects, realistic shadows, and real-time particles. Even the sound had dimension, making the player perceive the space around them before even seeing it. Half-Life 2 created a new standard for how technology can serve the narrative, not just impress visually. Speaking of narrative, few games achieved so much with so little. Gordon Freeman is the most eloquent silent protagonist in gaming history, precisely because the world speaks for him. Everything is told through the setting, the dialogues of the other characters, and the situations the player witnesses. The city dominated by the Combine, the Resistance surviving in the shadows, the small gestures of humanity amidst the chaos. Everything is pure storytelling, without the need for long cutscenes or forced explanations. Valve understood that the player should feel, and not just watch the story. And this cinematic approach without taking control away from the player was what inspired an entire generation of developers. Games like BioShock, Dishonored, Portal, Metro, Prey, Titanfall 2, and even The Last of Us owe something to Half-Life 2. Whether in level design that teaches without tutorials, in physics that integrates narrative and mechanics, or in the use of the environment as a tool for immersion, the game's influence is visible even today. It established the modern standard for rhythm, atmosphere, and visual storytelling within FPS games. The technical legacy was also enduring. The source engine became the basis for countless other titles and legendary mods. Garry's mod, Counter-Strike Source, and Portal were born from the same DNA as Half-Life 2, and all of them helped expand its creative universe. While many games from 2004 were forgotten with the advance of technology, Half-Life 2 remains visually coherent and mechanically solid. Its physics, structure, and design are still studied in game design schools. It is the type of work that ages not in appearance, but in brilliance. In the end, Half-Life 2 is more than a game. It is a cultural landmark. It proved that video games can be art without giving up being games. It showed that technology and emotion can coexist, and that good design can tell a story with more depth than any dialogue. Even 2 decades later, its echo is still strong. Every generation that discovers it understands why it is cited as the ultimate reference. It is that kind of game that more than being played needs to be felt. And that perhaps is its most enduring legacy.